Well, here with me in the studio now is Hashem Osseiran, who's an ICRC spokesperson. Thank you very much indeed for coming to see us. The ICRC, of course, calling for all crossings into Gaza to be opened. What are the main needs on the ground as you see them?
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is still catastrophic. The ceasefire is only the beginning. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. People need medicine, they need food, they need safe water, but they also need more complex items for the repair of water and electricity networks, for the repair of hospitals, spare parts for generators, parts for ambulances. So the needs are very enormous. We have continuously called for the unimpeded entry of humanitarian assistance to enter to Gaza and for it to be distributed safely to people wherever they are. We continue to make this call, and the ICRC stands ready to scale up its response.
It's been said that 600 trucks are needed every day to get into Gaza to meet the basic needs of the people there. Do we know at this stage what sort of level of aid is actually getting in terms of numbers of trucks?
We don't really know exactly the number of trucks that's coming in, but the number of trucks is a distraction because 100 trucks, 200 trucks is not going to be enough. What we really need is an unimpeded, unrestricted entry of humanitarian assistance into the Gaza Strip. And we need it to be delivered safely to people wherever they are. And it's also not just about the amount of aid that's coming in, it's also about the kind of aid that's coming in. People need more than flour, they need more than wheat, they need more than water in order to begin the reconstruction of Gaza and to give people the opportunity to rebuild their lives and to do more than survive. There's a whole range of very complex material that needs to be allowed to enter.
Okay, so once the aid gets into Gaza, what's the mechanism for distributing it across the territory?
Well, the ICRC has decades of experience working in conflict zones around the world. We deliver aid impartially. We deliver aid safely to people wherever they are. We have teams on the ground in the Gaza Strip, in Gaza City, in Deir al-Balah, in Rafah. And so the mechanism that we use is one that's according to our fundamental principles, and it's one that distributes aid in a way that upholds the dignity of the people that we serve.
It's believed that up to 400,000 people could still be in Gaza City. That's a place that hasn't had any aid deliveries for several weeks. Would that therefore be a priority area for the ICRC?
The ICRC has already started expanding its presence in Gaza City. On October 1, we had to suspend operations in our office there because of the intensification of military hostilities. But we have recently reopened our Gaza City office. We currently have teams on the ground. As an organization, our priority is proximity to the population. And because we want to stay close to the people we serve, we have teams in Gaza City who are ready to provide assistance, and equally importantly, we're ready to provide support for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, who are our partners.
Do we know anything about the condition of people in Gaza City? Do we know, for example, whether they're in a markedly worse situation than people in other parts of the country, or is there no such information?
I think that for everyone throughout the Gaza Strip, the conditions are extremely dire. Houses have been destroyed, hospitals have been destroyed, there's little access to food, there's little access to water. So I think we are talking about a general situation throughout the Strip that is very catastrophic. That applies to Gaza City because Gaza City has also been very heavily impacted by the recent intensification of military hostilities, but it also applies to many other areas throughout the Strip.
Throughout this conflict, we've interviewed people on both sides, and repeatedly we heard from Israeli officials this allegation that aid was being stolen and therefore they would restrict it entering Gaza in the first place. Is it still something that is being reported, the security of aid, for example? Are these aid trucks being intercepted? Are there attacks? Is there anything like that that you've heard?
The ICRC can only speak specifically about its experience, and we have not seen any major looting of our assistance or our aid.
Since the beginning?
Yes,
okay.
And our hope is that with the increase of aid coming into Gaza, with the increase of deliveries, that the level of desperation would decrease. And so people will have enough supplies.
Okay. Obviously, for aid to get into Gaza, there has to be a road. And some of the roads are clearly damaged, destroyed, or covered in debris. Is that something, is road clearance, I mean, it sounds like a very obvious question, but is that an actual hurdle to getting aid into the Strip?
Road clearance, the destruction of roads is a hurdle for all operations, all our operations in Gaza, and not just the entry of humanitarian assistance. This is going to be a massive challenge, and there's not a single actor that can do this alone. Our teams try their best. We have logistic experts, we have experts in weapons contaminations, but what we really need is to see a concerted effort, and we need local authorities to have the support and the supplies that they need in order to carry out this enormous task.
Obviously, there have been huge diplomatic developments in the last week, 10 days. Has any of that translated into an improvement, albeit a slight improvement, for the living conditions for people in Gaza?
I think the conditions in Gaza today are so dire that it's still going to take time before we can see an improvement. We have shortages of stocks that are going to take time to recover. People are still moving back to their homes and to their towns and to their cities. There are still people who have gone back and found their homes reduced to rubble. So I think we're still in a stage where it's too soon to speak of recovery. There's a lot that still needs to be done. And there are humanitarian organizations on the ground, including the ICRC, that have made it one of their main objectives to help people begin this road to recovery.
We're now mid-October. Temperatures go down quite sharply in the next couple of weeks, really, and November, December, and into January, you can see the temperature even below zero. How is, what preparations are being made for the winter? And given that 80% of homes and houses have been destroyed in Gaza, I mean, clearly shelter is going to be a major issue. What provisions need to be made for the winter?
Over the past 2 weeks, we have brought in shelter items. We have brought in blankets. So we're bringing in supplies in order to equip the population with the basic elements that they need. But this is not enough. We really need to see a scaling up of assistance so that communities and people, many of whom have lost their homes, many of whom are displaced, can have just the basic necessities for dignified living, especially as conditions get really harsh with winter and temperatures dropping.
Now, where the ICRC has played a really unique role, a different role to a lot of the other agencies on the ground, you were involved in the handover of 20 living hostages on Monday. How did that go? Did it go smoothly on the whole, that process?
The return of the living hostages is a source of relief for the ICRC. We were able to reunite families. These are families who have spent nearly 2 years in an agonizing nightmare. The fact that we were able to facilitate these reunifications is a big relief for us. We are also relieved that we were able to bring back more than 1,800 detainees, and we were able to return hundreds of families on that side. And so this moment really speaks to the fact that neutral humanitarian action can save lives, it can change lives, but we need the parties to reach an agreement. When the parties reach an agreement, families are reunited, and we are able to bring people back together.
Are you able to say anything about the condition of the people who came back into Israel? Obviously, there have been reports in the media, but anything the ICRC can tell us about what sort of a condition those 20 were in?
One of the top priorities for the ICRC is to respect the privacy of the families and to respect the dignity of all those in our care. And for that reason, we do not speak about the conditions. That applies both to hostages but also to detainees.
What were the biggest challenges of that operation to bring those 20 people back into Israel? I mean, presumably there were changes of vehicle, changes of teams on numerous occasions. I'm not asking for specifics, I'm sure you can't give them, but overarching challenges, what would you say they were?
This operation is a very complex operation. It requires meticulous planning. It requires a lot of work on logistics, on security. As you mentioned, the roads in Gaza are destroyed. Some are also littered with unexploded ordinances. We had to mobilize ICRC teams from across the world, from as far away as Kinshasa and Bogota, in order to reinforce our teams that are already on the ground so that we have enough people to carry out these operations. We deployed health professionals to make sure that we can have medical care provided to those who need it. We had to coordinate with all sides. And throughout the process, our main priority was to ensure the safety and dignity of all of those in our care. This will always be a big challenge, and we are relieved that we were able to bring all of them back home safely.
Okay, so you're making it sound like it was, at times, quite a dangerous operation.
Any operation, any release and transfer operation, and that applies to Israel and the occupied territories, but also across the world, there are always challenges. And we will always try our utmost as an organization to work through these challenges in order to ultimately secure family reunifications.
Now, where we are today is in a situation where, that transfer of living hostages has taken place. Now, the questions are about the 28 bodies that were stipulated in the peace plan as being people that had to be handed over back to Israel by Hamas. That was supposed to happen on Monday, and it's partially happened, but it hasn't fully happened. What's the reason for that not having happened as was expected?
We cannot speak to the parties. The ICRC's role is to facilitate the return of human remains as per the ceasefire agreement. It is the obligation of the parties to find the remains, to collect the remains, to evacuate them. We can only act as a neutral intermediary in cooperation with the parties. So we cannot really speak to the reasons for any delay.
Tell me a bit about that operation in terms of the logistical support, expertise that the ICRC brings, the resources that are needed. How does something like this happen?
The ICRC works a lot on the dignified management of the dead. It's one of the core things in our mandate. And we want to ensure that all remains that are entrusted in our care are handled with dignity. So we provide body bags to make sure that the bodies are preserved and properly labeled. We provide refrigerated trucks in some instances. And so really what we try to do is to make sure that all of the material and equipment is there to ensure a dignified transfer. And then we also speak with all sides, and we have the trust of all sides to be able to carry out that transfer.
And clearly, looking at pictures of Gaza, so much destruction. There are multiple different statistics to how to measure the amount of rubble on the ground. It could fill up Central Park, 13 times the pyramids of Giza. Given the amount of rubble on the ground, has that played a part in complicating the process of locating the remains of these deceased hostages?
Again, it's not the ICRC that's responsible for locating or finding the remains. For us, we will not give up. The families of the deceased are not going to give up, and we're not going to give up either. We're going to continue to do everything that we can to ensure that we can bring human remains back to their families for dignified burial. We will continue to do our utmost, and we will continue to work under the conviction that we can get the job done. And this is what we're doing. We continue to carry out these sensitive operations. We're committed to continuing to carry them out, and we hope to see this through.
And Israel's saying that if this doesn't happen, and if those bodies are not returned, they're already threatening and carrying out their threat to switch off the supply of aid. What are the consequences of that going to be for the people of Gaza?
The people of Gaza today need an uninterrupted, unhindered, and unrestricted flow of aid into the territory. As we mentioned earlier, they need food, they need safe water, they need medicine. So it's very imperative that they have access to the basics to live in dignity. And we have continuously called for this aid to come in, and we hope to continue to see it coming in at scale.
In terms of the logistics, obviously Gaza, much of it destroyed, clearly a more dangerous place in the world to do something like this, and for the reasons we've been saying, repatriate the remains of those people. The ICRC was also involved in the return of 360 Palestinian militants who were killed. The first group of 45, I believe, handed over on Tuesday. So clearly a lot more still to be repatriated. Was that process more straightforward, given that it was going in the opposite direction than the Gaza operation?
Logistically, the remains of 45 deceased is a significant number. So we had to bring in refrigerated trucks in order to ensure the proper management and that they're contained in a proper way. We had to deploy personnel to carry out the transfer. There is no straightforward operation. There will always be challenges with the transfer of human remains. But again, as we do with the hostages, we will continue to do our utmost to ensure that the remains of deceased Palestinians are brought back to their families for dignified burial. And this is also a key priority for us, and it's also an essential element of the agreement.
Just lastly, since the 7th of October 2023, the ICRC has facilitated the transfer of 172 hostages, 3,472 Palestinian detainees, and this ongoing process of repatriating human remains. How does it feel to work for an organization that, under incredibly challenging circumstances, has managed to remain neutral and effective?
We live in a very polarized world. And what the ICRC has managed to do this week shows the value of neutrality. Neutrality in action. When you have neutral humanitarian action, you can reunite families and you can bring back the deceased for dignified burial. There are very few actors that can do that today, and that's one of the unique added values of the ICRC. And this only reinforces our commitment to our neutrality. And it really shows us that when we commit to neutrality, we can yield results.
And presumably you have a great sense of pride to work for an organization like that.
Of course.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed, Hashem Osseiran, and thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and see us.
Thanks.